So we're going to be going through Psalms 25 and 26 tonight. And what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is if we start with 26 and then we'll go back and do 25. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read through Psalm 26. It's pretty short. And this is out of the New King James Version. It says, "Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity. I have also trusted in the Lord. I shall not slip. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my heart, my mind and my heart, for your loving kindness is before my eyes, and I've walked in your truth. I have not sat with idolatrous mortals, nor will I go with hypocrites. I have hated the assembly of evildoers, and will not sit with the wicked. I wash my hands in innocence. So I will go about your altar, O Lord, that I may proclaim with the voice of thanksgiving and tell of all your wondrous works. Lord, I have loved the habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells. Do not gather my soul with sinners, nor my life with bloodthirsty men, in whose hands is a sinister scheme, and whose right hand is full of bribes. But as for me, I will walk in my integrity. Redeem me and be merciful to me. My foot stands in an even place. In the congregations, I will bless the Lord." So this is a Psalm of David. And what I want to try and do is tease out some things that are probably not obvious in here. But, I mean, wow. Who prays like this? I mean, think about what he's saying here. This is amazing. You know, he's saying, "Vindicate me." I looked at probably 10 different translations. Every translation I looked at translated it that way. Vindicate me. Vindicate me. And so that would insinuate that there's an accusation against him, right? And what he says is, and this is what really strikes me about this prayer, is that what David says, you know, is try me, examine me, you know, go inside me, prove me. And that word, that idea of proving there, it's like, you know, what you do with metal, you know, how you heat it up, you know, so you burn off all the bad stuff, you know, the dross that's in it, you know, prove me. Examine me, try my mind and my heart. I'm always looking at your loving kindness, and that's that word again. I've mentioned to you before, and other times that I've been here, that Hebrew word chesed, which can be translated steadfast love, but it has a lot of different. You know, there's nuances to that word. There's like different shades, you know, to that. It's you know, faithfulness and loyalty. It's God's love that has. I think of it as like cement. You know how you could use cement, you know, for laying a sidewalk or something out on the ground. But you can't build bridges unless you put, you reinforce it with something like rebar, right? And that's how I think about this. It's like God's love, His steadfast, His loving kindness is filled with loyalty and a commitment by Him to be kind to us, to be merciful to us. And that's what that word conveys. And it's like, you know, if you think about it, it's like He puts that on us. You know, that's His covenant, you know, that He's placed upon us. And He's given that to us, and He's loyal to that. He's faithful to that. And David is saying, I'm keeping that in mind. I'm keeping that in mind. I'm thinking about that. And I've walked in your truth. And that word there is another Hebrew word. You find it often, those two words in a pair, you know, the steadfast love and truth, steadfast love and truth. That word can also mean faithfulness. There's a real emphasis here on God's faithfulness. And so what's interesting is that David is willing to completely expose himself and say, look at me, I'm trusting you. I'm trusting you. The word that is right there in verse 2, for I have trusted in the Lord, that particular word is used often in context of where it's talking about God's governance, you know, that where He's, you know, He is the one who is ordering things, right? And he's maintaining a governance over it, over the world. And it reminds me of that Psalm 51:6, you desire truth in the inward parts, and David is completely opening himself up there. So this is clearly a very bold prayer. And I was thinking about the circumstances, in which someone might pray like that. And he goes on to, like we read, he says, I'm not hanging out with evildoers. Check me out. And I'd love to be in your dwelling place. I want to be where you're living. But he's not claiming to be perfect at all, not in any sense, because he says down there, I think it's in verse 12, he says, redeem me, be merciful to me. So he's not like he's boasting. He's not like he's boasting, but he is confident in something. And what I think this is what's interesting about David is that I think in looking at that idea of loving kindness, it's what God puts on us, but if you think about it, it's also what he wants back from us to him. Do you see what I'm saying? You ever read Hosea 6:6? I desire mercy and not sacrifice. It's that same word, loving kindness, steadfast love. I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice. And then also in Micah 6:8, he has told you, old man, what he requires of you. You know that verse? To do justice, love kindness, same word, and to walk humbly before your God. So it's something that God gives to us, but then at the same time he says, that's the way we do relationship. It's the way we do relationship. Faithfulness, loyalty, dedication to each other, and kindness. So what I think is what's interesting about this particular prayer is, and this is what I wanted to kind of like bring out, is remembering who David is. Who is he?
A man after God's own heart.
A
man after God's own heart.
Man after God's own heart. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because why? Do you remember what happened with Saul? Saul had the position, he got the anointing, he was king, but he wasn't listening to God, right? He didn't follow God. And his heart wasn't, in the same way as David's, as wanting to do what God said, being after God's own heart. And so what I think is kind of interesting here is that I think David is mindful of his role as king. He's king of Israel. Excuse me.
I think he learned from Saul.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. Yeah, I do. What's interesting though also about Saul is about David and Saul is how faithful David was to Saul. Right? He had multiple opportunities. David was given. Samuel went to David and said, "You're going to be the next anointed, right? You're going to take Saul's place." But while Saul was still living, how did David behave? Always, wanting to reconcile with Saul, even though he was running, he had opportunity, he snuck in the camp at night, he had a chance to kill Saul. No, he didn't do it, because he also recognized that Saul was God's anointed as well. And he would not raise his hand against that, right? So, and I'm thinking in David's role, understanding, I think this is kind of a priestly prayer in a way on behalf of the people. He is king, right? And what he's saying, and this is kind of interesting, is that what he's saying is that I'm open to you, God. Examine me. In any way that I'm deficient, teach me to walk in your paths, right? And then he says, my foot is on an even ground, I won't slip. And so think about that also, for ourselves. There's a sense in which I carry this also, and I'm sure many of you do too, of having this priestly sense of headship for your families, for your fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers, and your integrity, the integrity that you walk in, the truth that you walk in, matters for those that you are over, right? Your grandkids, your kids. It makes a difference in their lives. So as I read this, I'm recognizing, I'm thinking, this is where David, I think this is where David is coming from. Yes, there were always accusations against him, right? And he's asking God to examine him because he wants to be the best that he can be for himself, but also I think for his role as king and also for the people of Israel. And so I take a lesson from that for myself as a father and as a grandfather, that is how I want to be as well. I want to be completely opened up to God. Not only for myself, but also for my family as well. It's a very, very interesting prayer. See if there's anything that I wanted to mention about that in here. That idea of integrity is completeness. It also is that word is associated with the breastplate that priests wore, the upper part of the breastplate that the priests wore. So I'm walking in that. So that's what gives me that sense that it's a priestly. There's an element of that. This is a priestly prayer in a way. Very interesting. All right. And the word that's where he says in verse 8, I love the habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells. That word glory there, that is a word that indicates usually where God's glory appears in a particular place. It's associated, what theophanies are? You know what theophanies are? Yeah, it's like, appearances of God, in different places, when the angel of the Lord appeared in different places, So when we're talking about the glory of the Lord being in a particular place, in abundance, and where there's a whole lot of God's presence in one place, that's what that word indicates. He's saying here, I want to be in that place where your glory dwells. And that was his house. Remember, that's where, when Solomon, after David, built the temple, do you remember when the Lord's presence came and filled the temple? Yeah. So there's that sense. I think David had that same sense about the tabernacle. And so he asks, don't gather my soul with the sinners, and my life with bloodthirsty men. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we get to Psalm 25, because I think it's always interesting, when you go back and read the story of David, and if you haven't read it in a long time, it's a fun thing to go back and read, because there was so much controversy about his kingship. And even though Samuel came, and told him, you're going to be king, and he was king, and Saul was after him. And then after Saul died, there were other people, that weren't completely satisfied with David being king, so they were after him. And for a long time, it took a while for him to consolidate his reign, and then, there were seasons, later in his life, with the rebellion of Absalom, that there was always controversy about his reign. There was always a season where he seemed to be having to deal with something, a challenge to his kingship. So. But what I think is very interesting about Psalm 26 is the boldness of it. It's bold, but at the same time, it's a willingness. It's like a willingness to just say, God, go through me, examine me, melt me down, get all the stuff out, the bad stuff out. because I want to stand in your presence. I want to be relived. I don't want to be with the evildoers. I don't want to be with those who are coming up with sinful schemes. I want to be in your presence. So melt me down and work me over again. So it's a very bold prayer, you know. How many of us pray that way? How often do we pray like that? Completely open up ourselves to God in that way. It's amazing, amazing prayer. As I read it, I just try, you know, to just hear David, you know, and what, a person who would dare to pray that way. I mean, it's not a challenge to God. He's not challenging God in any way. No, not at all. He's just saying, but I'm willing to go to distance. I'm willing to wherever you want to go in this relationship, and whatever you need to fix in me in order for you to accomplish your purposes, that's where I'm willing to go. It's an amazing prayer. So that's why I say, wow, 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 you know, regarding Psalm 26. All right, let's go on to Psalm 25. This is a little bit longer. This psalm's about being in a desperate spot, being in a desperate place. I just finished. I'm working on I'm in a program. I'm working on a counseling degree. I'm working toward counseling, and I just finished a class in crisis intervention. And so the definition of a crisis is that when events become so disruptive that a person doesn't have the coping skills, you know, doesn't have the emotional stability, doesn't have the understanding to cope with what's going on. And so what it causes disequilibrium. You become what's the word? Disequilibrium. Where you become this, you know, being pushed around like you're being pushed, and that creates dysfunction, right? So from that point on, you're not able to function until you can get some tools or get some coping skills, or enough time goes past, you know, that you're able to kind of get your hands around it and have the framework and your understanding and your emotions to deal with it. Then you're going to remain in a crisis. And that may be years, maybe many years. And as I read Psalm 25, he's in a crisis of sorts. He has enemies. He has enemies that are violent, and they want to kill him. And he's deeply distressed. So I'd like to read with you Psalm 25. And I'm going to start reading at verse 16, the second part. Because in this psalm, there's a problem, and then there's a solution. So I'm going to read the problem first, okay? I'm going to start reading from verse 16. And it says, "Turn yourself to me and have mercy on me, for I am desolate and afflicted. The troubles of my heart have enlarged. Bring me out of my distresses. Look on my affliction and my pain and forgive all my sins. Consider my enemies, for they are many, and they hate me with a cruel hatred. Keep my soul and deliver me. Let me not be ashamed, for I put my trust in you. Let integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you." So there's a problem. There are people after David that hate him, and he's extremely distressed about it. I mean, that's not surprising. Not surprising at all. I mean, to the point they wanted to kill him. They wanted to hunt him down and kill him. You think about what he's saying here. And I think about this in terms of like, the persecution of the church, persecution of Christians all over the world. All over, in a lot of places in the world, Christians are hunted and they're killed. There are people who take great joy and killing Christians. For 2005, I had the blessing of going to India for a short-term mission trip. I was there. I was in a city called Hyderabad, which is kind of like central, but a little bit more to the east, southeast of the center, I guess. And Hyderabad was, at that time, it was a city. I mean, this is one of the many big cities in India, but at that time, Hyderabad was 8 million people, right? And today, it's I looked it up online. It's about 11 million people right now. It's a huge place. It's like Los Angeles and just that part of India, But Hyderabad was the city that had the highest concentration of Muslims in India. I don't know if you remember, if some of you were old enough to remember, but there was a time when there was the East and West Pakistan, right? So today we just have Pakistan and Bangladesh. But how that happened was that when India was, after it gained its independence and it was sort of solidifying, itself and what kind of nation it was going to be, they encouraged the Muslims to get out of the country. And so there was a huge migration north, up into leaving India, and they moved up, a lot of them moved up into Pakistan, or the Pakistans. And, but Hyderabad, there was a really influential guy in India who was Muslim, and he wanted to carve out a Muslim state inside of India. And so the province that city's in, Hyderabad's in Andhra Pradesh, that's the province it's in. And so it had a real high concentration of Muslims there. And but the interesting thing is that the threat against Christians weren't the Muslims. It was the radical Hindus that live farther north. Most of them live farther north. They have more control in the northern part of India. And just before we got there for our mission trip, there were 2 pastors that were killed by radical Muslims. By radical Hindus. And because they don't want anything to do with the West. They were very after the British rule, they were very anti-Western, wanting nothing to do with the West. And so Christianity being a Western religion, they don't want anything to do with it. So especially, to have their own people, preaching the gospel, that just really sets them off. When we were there, we were there to do ministry. We were on a mission trip, and we were teaching at different places around. And but you can't do that just anywhere when you go to India. You have to be invited onto private property in order to do something like that. And my team was invited to. There was a guy who was a geologist, and he taught geology. He happened to teach geology at Northwestern University. He was Indian, but he did come here to teach for a number of years. And when he retired, he went back to India. And he had this big compound. And what he was doing is he was training missionaries. So people would come from all over India to get some basic training in how to run their own business, to have their own business so they could take care of themselves. And also, we were just some basic Bible training. That's why I was there, helping with that. And so we would have to drive out to this compound. But like I was saying, shortly before we got there were 2 pastors that were killed, and one of them had acid poured down his throat, and very, very brutal. And he ended up dying. But this really goes on in the world, where people want to kill the people of God. And he says there in verse 19, they are violent and they hate me. I don't know about you, but that really, really bothers me. There was a time when we were there, we had gone to the same location. We were going out to that geology teacher's property where all of this training was going on. And so we were going in and out of that every day. And then about 3 days before we left, we were coming out and we got to this intersection and this truck came down the road. It was a dump truck. And standing inside the back of the truck was about 15, 20 guys. And they all had turbans on and most of them had machetes and they were waving the machetes in the air and they were banging them against the side of the truck. I thought, oh no, we've had it. You know, they've seen us go in and out of here every day. You know, we're done. We're done. And for a couple minutes there, I was very concerned. But our driver, we had a driver. You don't drive in India. You have drivers, you know, because it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But the driver said, he said, "Oh, that's a wedding party." And what it was, yeah, they have a different concept of wedding over there, yeah. But they were bringing the bride to the groom. So they were on their way to the ceremony. They were delivering the bride. But I mean, by appearances, it was like, you know, we're done. We're done. I couldn't see her. I guess she was like tucked in behind all these guys. But it just gave me a sense of how a lot of Christians live, you know, like missionaries or people that just live in other parts of the world, you know, who are being persecuted, that do have people that hate them for being Christians. And so if you think about that, pray for our missionaries. But for some, it's not enough to just kill Christians. They want to shame them as well. You know, they take great pride in persecuting the bride of Christ, right? And I think that's the angst, the crisis, you know, that David is feeling in this particular psalm. So he says there several times, verse 2, don't let them put me to shame. Don't let them shame me for my confession. Verses 2 and 3 and 20 he talks about not being shamed. So he's extremely concerned about people that are always against him. So the solution is, as I understand, as I read this psalm, is verses 3 through 15. And so let's go through that. But it's a petition, and the solution for David is not to run away from the situation, not at all, but to give himself deeper and deeper to the Lord, to invest himself deeper and deeper, to come to understand God more deeply, to gain understanding and wisdom about who God is and what he's doing. And he says, and I will not be made ashamed or fall into the trap of those who wait for me. I think the idea behind this, again, I was mentioning about the idea of God's governance. And he's entrusting himself to God and how God is governing the world. Again, that particular word, trust, that's used here is a word that's associated with governance. But Romans 1, we know, Paul tells us there that the heavens declare, who God is. Proverbs 3 talks about, and many other Psalms, talk about God declaring himself just in what he's made. And we could see that, but you know what? A lot of people can't, because sin dampens that. Sin dampens that and doesn't let people see it. And but as we are faithful and as we grow in the Lord and we gain more understanding, we see how, when, and where God is working. Proverbs 3:19 says, "The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the depths were broken up, and the clouds dropped down the dew." And if you want to study out this particular word about trusting, you can look at 2 Kings 18:5. And you can look at 1 Chronicles 5:20, Judges 9:26. So he says here, "I put my trust in you." And then verse 3 is very interesting. It says, "Indeed, let no one who waits for you be ashamed. Let those be ashamed who deal treacherously without cause." So there's a contrast. He's understanding here that those who are trusting in God, who wait on God, they won't be ashamed, versus those who deal treacherously, because they will meet a different reward. Lead me into deeper knowledge of you, for you are the God of my salvation. So I'm going to plant myself right here. I'm going to wait for you. You are the God of my salvation. That's a testimony. That's a declaration. It's a testimony based on previous experience. The times when he's been delivered by God. So he knows that his salvation comes from God. It's a testimony from him, and he's declaring that. How many of us have been in very tight situations? And we want to solve them. And we work ourselves into lathers trying to solve situations that sometimes just can't be solved by us. And we have to wait on God. And he does solve them. And so he says, "Show me your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me into your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. I will wait for you all the day." So I think this is really, really striking parallel. I mean, you think about what is going on in this prayer. He's worried about people who are violent, that want to kill him, and he has a lot of anxiety about it. It's ripping him up inside in a lot of ways. What's his solution? To go deeper into God. Teach me your paths. I'm going to trust in the way that you do things. Because you're the God of my salvation. You've shown that over and over, and I'm just going to trust in you. I'm going to wait for you to deliver this. I read this as an assertion based on his experience. And then he has he goes into a petition for mercy. He says, "Remember me," in verses 6 and 7, "your tender mercies and your loving kindness." There's that word again. Remember God, like as if he has to remember, but he's just pointing that out. "There from old." And this verse 7 is probably one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible. "Do not remember the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions." Boy. Yeah. Boy, I am so reassured, because that verse is in the Bible. To hear someone else acknowledge, what I did in my youth. Wow. I think about some of the things that I did, just the destruction I caused in my own life and other people's lives.
As a teen? As a teen?
And then some, yeah. But don't remember the sins of my youth. What's great though is that God always redeems. If you go toward him, he redeems. He redeems. He turns it back. He brings it back. It may look different than how it started, but He puts it back together in a very meaningful way that shows you, how he's acting in your life and the life of loved ones, maybe some loved ones that you hurt. But he does redeem. And if you're in a situation where you're waiting for God to do more in someone's life, I just say continue to pray. Hang in there. Press in. Because he is faithful. It's like he says, I'm always keeping your loving kindness in my sight. Remember it. Remember it, God. You've been this way forever. It's of old. It's been this way forever. Keeping that in my sight. According to your mercy, remember me. And for your goodness sake, for your sake, for your name's sake, when we come to know him, he puts his name upon us. There's a sense in which we are the temple of God. We're individually, corporately, we're the temple of God. He puts his name on us. And like we read in Psalm 23, he causes me to lie down. He leads me into paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Right? And like I said, I look back at my youth sometimes and I honestly wonder how God could even look at me. I mean, some of the things I did were just so grievous. Looking back, I had no sense of what I was doing back then. Now that I get older and I understand relationships, I understand the precious gifts that God has given us. I understand more deeply how grievous those things are, but I also understand when I have those realizations just how deeply he redeems those things, how effective his salvation is, in our lives and in our relationships. Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm on television.
Okay, I'll try. I'm almost done, though.
Should have said something a long time ago.
You should have, yeah. Yeah. In verses 8 through 11, they're an affirmation of who God is and what it's like to be in relationship with him. Good and upright is the Lord, and he teaches sinners his way. Isn't that amazing? I mean, you look back, even after all the stuff, David says, don't remember the sins of my youth. But now he affirms who God is. This is who God is. He's good and he's upright. He teaches sinners his way. And the humble he guides in justice. The humble he teaches his way. All the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth. That's an amazing realization. When you look at how God is acting in people's lives and you see there's a pattern here. At times, he needs to spank us. He needs to discipline us. Sometimes he needs to deal with people in harsh ways. But even in that, his ways are mercy and truth. He's working truth into us. And he's doing it in kindness and mercy. To such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. All the paths are mercy and truth. To such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. I think it's so important that we keep testimonies, that we repeat to ourselves, we testify. You remember when we first started a few weeks back, and we went back into 1 Chronicles about the time when David brought the ark into Jerusalem. And he set people there to constantly, he set the priests up and singers. And the whole idea was that he wanted there to be a constant declaration, a near constant declaration of people singing over Jerusalem all the things that God had done, to recount all the things that God had done, so that Jerusalem would be a place that was bathed in worship and testimony. And I take that as an example of how to live my life. When things are going weird or things are not going the way that I want, to keep in mind to continue to just talk about the things that God has done. And it changes things. Changes things. For your name's sake, there it is again, O Lord, pardon my iniquity, for it is great. God does these things because of who he is. He's good and upright, and he teaches sinners. Can you hear me now? Okay. He guides and teaches the humble. For those who keep his covenant and keep declaring his testimonies. Again, he's put his name upon us. And then 12 through 15, who is the man that fears the Lord? Him shall he teach in the way he chooses. He himself shall dwell in prosperity, and his descendants shall inherit the earth. Where did we hear that before? Remember that? The meek shall inherit the earth. The secret of the Lord is with those who fear him. Secret counsel. So God has secret counsel with those who fear him. What's the beginning of wisdom and knowledge? Fear of the Lord. Yeah. So he reveals his secret counsel to them, and he will show them his covenant. Well, we know his covenant. We can read his covenant. But he will show it to them. He will reveal it so they can understand it experientially, existentially. My eyes are ever toward the Lord, for he shall pluck my feet out of the net. So I stand, like the last psalm said, I won't slip. My feet are on even ground. My feet are on even ground. Excuse me a second. And what's interesting at the end of this psalm is verse 22. Redeem Israel, O God, out of their troubles. And there's a lot of psalms. You read them, and they always have this little, kind of almost like an epitaph at the end. Redeem Israel. Help Jerusalem. So I think there's a sense, again, a priestly sense in which David prays, and he offers these thoughts to God, and he sees himself in his role, the unique role that he's been called for, and he understands that how he goes will go the country. Don't you wish we had all of our leaders were like that? To live in that kind of integrity, to live before God with an open heart, ask God, teach me your ways. Have leaders that are praying for your welfare. An amazing idea. It's all right here. David teaches us. So those are my thoughts on Psalms 25 and 26.